haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Gloriavale Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Cult Chat. How are we all?
Doing great, thank you.
Great to be here.
Excellent. Well, Lindy, you've got a lot to say. We're going to throw this over to you because you're going to introduce a special guest for us, and we're really interested in hearing this person's perspective on the work they do in the cult recovery sphere. And then we'll come together again at the end, the three of us, we'll have a chat. Just to point out to our listeners that this is part one of two. So our special guest has given us, two lots of airtime, and we're really grateful for that. So take it away.
Hello and a special welcome to our friend Tore Klevjer. Today we are going to be having a chat with Tore, who is dialing in from Wollongong in Australia. And Tore is somebody who's very familiar with the cultiverse. He was recruited as a young man into the Children of God, and where he spent just over a decade before managing to extract himself and his family. And since then, Tore, you've worked in the field of kind of post-cult recovery for a while, haven't you? You've been working as a counsellor for over a decade, and I believe you also now are a key leader with CIFS Australia, which stands for Cult Information and Family Support, one of Australia's only real entities that supports those who are leaving high control groups or relationships. Have I summed you up fairly accurately there, Tore, in a line or two?
Yeah, I think that's well done. Thanks for having me here, Lindy. It's great to be chatting with you again. And I'm the current president of Cult Information and Family Support. And I have a story.
You do. You're definitely not someone who's coming at this from an outside perspective. You have got hard-won experience yourself that you bring to the table as a therapist and as a leader of CIF. So today, there's so many things that we would love to ask you about. So it's looking like we'll break this interview into two episodes. So just giving that as a heads up to our listeners that I think today, for our first episode, let's hear a bit more about how you were recruited into the Children of God and what your time there was like, and how you left, how you found your feet, and how you ended up choosing a career pathway that involved counselling other cult leavers. And then in our upcoming one, we'll hear a bit more about CIFs and a bit more about what it's like being a therapist to other former members when you are one yourself. How does that sound for an overall direction?
It sounds like we'll be here for a long, long time. It sounds good.
We could be, yeah. I mean, I'm really curious about recruitment because obviously I myself was born into a high control group. And so the whole area of recruiting is unfamiliar to me. So I'm curious to hear about that. Like what were you, just an average Australian young man, a bear swilling, kangaroo hunting young man, or tell us about.
I only ever hunted one kangaroo, and I didn't like the look of it dying, so I stopped. But beer swilling is fairly correct. Yeah, I had I'd left school pretty directionless. My father dragged me into a trade almost by the ear. He took me down to the local garage and said, "My son wants to learn a trade." I didn't, and I ended up being a mechanic. So I finished my trade, and yeah, I like your choice of words. They're recruited. I didn't join, but people who are recruited into cults always have a vulnerability. And I had a number of vulnerabilities going on. I was like the prime candidate for recruitment, really. So I finished my trade and I was 20 years old when my mother died of a stroke. And my father, being Norwegian, which is where the name comes from, um, made the suggestion to my sister and I that we travel to Norway and visit family for a year. So off we went to Norway, and I spent a year there being fairly isolated because I didn't know the language, and most of my relatives only spoke Norwegian. And then on my way back to Australia, traveling back down through Europe hitchhiking, I really had this strong sense of destiny, and I was really looking for something, an escape from society as I knew it. I always thought that there must be another way to live that didn't involve working for a mortgage and the 9 to 5 routine of life. And it was sort of in the 60s, 70s. So that was a bit of the hippie flower power time as well, where people were kind of doing their own thing and whatnot. So I was in that kind of framework, and hitchhiked my way back down through Europe as far as Amsterdam on my way home, and feeling quite alone and pretty lost, and seeing that my trip was coming to an end and that I'd soon be a slave to the system that I hated. And I ran into these people. Wonderful, wonderful people, very friendly, happy people. And yeah, my upbringing was as a Christian. And I had thoughts about being a Christian missionary as part of my escape plan as well from society. And they gave me an avenue to do that. So they invited me along to their coffee club, where there were a lot of other young people. And that same night, they just invited me to join them. I tried my best to debate them with scripture to find out if they were scripturally sound, because I'd had some upbringing in the Bible, and great advice from my father. He said, "Don't ever leave the Bible, son. It hasn't deceived anyone yet." And these guys knew their Bibles.
Wow.
And yeah, every question I asked, they would flip to a verse in the Bible and say, "Read this." And they put me in a position where I couldn't deny that these were the Christians of all Christians, like I'd never seen before.
Wow.
So
Actually,
yeah.
that's reminding me a lot of, I've chatted over the last few months with some people who have been recruited into Shincheonji, and they have expressed similar sentiments that the people recruiting them appeared to know their Bible very well and could bring up verses to kind of back up all of their behaviors and doctrines so it's challenging point.
Yeah. And of course, what you don't know at the time is that they really cherry pick these verses in isolation.
Yes.
And you can make it say anything you like.
What country was this in?
This was in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands.
Amsterdam. Yeah, okay.
It was an American-based cult, so everyone spoke English.
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah.
Yes. Yes, it was very exciting to join them. Just come and live with us. We live by faith. You don't work for money, honey. Jesus is better than that, they used to say.
Wow, how fascinating. So did you almost straight away start living communally, or
Yeah.
a type of communal living? Were you in houses or rural, or how did that work?
I moved in the same night. They challenged me to join immediately because they said we don't want the devil coming along and sowing his doubts. And if you've made a decision, because you're an adult male, you can make decisions. So if you've made a decision, then you should honour that by moving in immediately.
Wow.
And yeah, we lived in a dormitory style building at the time. We had a girls' dormitory and a boys' dormitory, and yeah, procured food from local markets and got all their scraps and cut the bad bits off, and yeah, survived pretty much hand to mouth.
Wow. Okay. And so you were in your early 20s at this point. And yeah, I'm just curious what sort of happened then. I mean, you've obviously immediately, yeah, you've jumped into the swimming pool. You're in it, you're immersed. What, and you were there for quite some time. So obviously, were you enamored with it for quite some time before doubts set in?
Yeah, I suppose the big thing, there's always doubts that come along,
Right.
but I was so predisposed to not wanting, like I had nowhere to go, really. I could go back to Norway and live with my father, or I could go to Australia and be alone and try and find a job again. And this just seemed the best option. So a lot of the doubts when they come along, you just kind of brush them aside and think, oh, it'll get better tomorrow, or it's not so bad. The good outweighs the discomfort of leaving.
Yeah.
And I had the whole family around me. I had people that seemed to love me, giving me group hugs and being very interested in me and love bombing me initially.
Yeah.
They also had a buddy system where new babes who joined had a buddy with them constantly.
Wow. Okay.
And I thought that was great because I'd been alone so long that I thought it was great to have a friend assigned to me.
Yeah.
But then that in itself was controlling. Like
Yeah.
we would go witnessing on the street, and your buddy would make sure you didn't talk to people too long, or they would see if a person you were talking to was asking you too many questions, and they'd come and take you away from them so that you wouldn't be influenced.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating when control is under the guise of care. It seems to be a common tactic that these kind of groups use, is that, yeah, and it's really fascinating. It's very manipulative, but very confusing because it does seem like care on many occasions. Yeah, but actually it's control. Yeah.
This is all for your own good.
Yeah. 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 So what happened next? I mean, I believe did you get married in there and have children in there eventually? Is that right?
Yeah, birth control wasn't allowed in the group, and marriages were pretty much arranged. They made it seem like you had a choice, but once again, yeah, I became quite valuable to the group with my training as a mechanic. And while other people were raising money on the street selling literature, I couldn't sell literature to save my soul. I was hopeless as a salesman. So they utilized me more as a mechanic, repairing cars for the group and stuff like that. And because mechanics had tended to leave the group prematurely, they wanted me to get married to tighten things up. So one of the leaders came along and said, is there any girls that you're interested in that we can sort of get you to work with and see if it works out? And there was one Irish girl I thought was quite pretty. I didn't know her at all. And I said, yeah, what about Dove? And the leader just went quiet. That wasn't the one he had in mind. And he said, oh, we were thinking more about Ruth. You seem to get along well with her and stuff like that. And I went, oh, well, yeah, okay, that sounds fine, I suppose. So I can work together with her. And yeah, so we developed quite a friendship and ended up marrying. But had the leadership not approved it, definitely not have happened. So yeah, it was, and it worked out well. It was one of the best things our leadership and my time in the group brought me. But yeah, with no birth control, we were no sooner married than we started having children. And yeah, I had in the time in the group, in those 11 years, we had 6 children.
Really? My goodness. Wow. Well, I'm the third of 6 children myself, and I know how incredibly busy it is to have a family with that many or more children. So that too would have undoubtedly taken up a huge amount of your time and attention and energy, just coping with life, with parenting, as well as. So were all the kids then, yeah, born and raised in this communal living type situation?
All but one. We had one child born soon after we left the group.
Right. Yeah.
And I suppose the beauty of a communal situation is that you do have some help, you do have some childcare help around you.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, and everybody's all doing the cooking and cleaning and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
so in some aspects it was a bit of a shared load, and in other aspects it was a lot worse because the children didn't have formal education and didn't play sport, television, all that kind of stuff was banned. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, some benefits as well as some things that no doubt they look back on and you've got some difficulty about. Yeah. Wow. I mean, that whole area of being a parent who's had children inside a group and then gone through the process of leaving. And did you take all your children with you when you left?
Yeah, when we left, we were really lucky in that regard. A lot of families were split in the group, and quite often if one person left, the family wouldn't leave, and they tried their best to split us before we left as well.
Wow.
And yeah, they were telling my wife, leadership would take her aside and say, oh, we know that he's a doubter, we know that he's a bad egg, and so we think that you should stay with the children. But what they didn't know was my wife was actually the one initiating us leaving at the time. So that just proved to me that was another false prophecy, or that they weren't hearing from God at all, because they got it completely wrong.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That is fascinating. And that is, again, a story that you hear time and time again with these high control groups, is trying to come in between, marriage or romantic partnerships, especially, and to perhaps try and persuade children to stay and that type of thing. So that's really interesting to hear that Children of God had those practices as well. And the pressure that it brings on a relationship is just unbelievable. So that's quite remarkable that Ruth and yourself were kind of united somewhat with your beliefs there, and that you managed to leave with your children, who would have all been of varying ages when
our eldest was 8 when we left.
Oh gosh, that's really young. Yeah. Wow. And so as a parent now, I mean, I'm thinking we might have some listeners who are in similar shoes, who are parents who are thinking of trying to leave with children or trying to hold a relationship together. Have you got any reflections on that there, on anything that might help them to take courage, or any advice? Or
it's hard to give advice on how to leave together, because it either happens or it doesn't. I think it depends so much on whether you wait for one another to be ready to leave, and if that is ever going to happen. I think the trick comes after you leave, that it takes a lot of patience, because you become different people after you leave. You revert to what you knew before the group. And so, your experience, you change a lot as a person, and at different rates, at different pace. So
that makes so much sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I imagine in particular that's true for when you leave and you've been recruited as an adult. So you've got that sort of, do some people call it a pre-cult identity that you kind of might pick back up on. And it's also true for those who leave, who were born and raised, because it's almost like often I see, yeah, them, and I know for myself that you're discovering things about yourself that you never knew existed, likes, dislikes, maybe career interests or all sorts of, aspects to who you are that are kind of unfolding for the first time. So I can imagine that, to go from an environment where so much of your marriage was actually sustained and founded on the group, to have that removed, I guess you're trying to figure out so many new things around what your beliefs are, what your values are, what your sort of foundation is. That must be incredibly hard.
Yes, it's different for both of you. For me, I was here I was a white patriarchal male who was dominant in the hierarchy of the group, and wives were childcare workers basically. And then we left, and my wife discovered feminism. Not extreme feminism, but she just wanted some equality, and she wanted to work, and she wanted to study, and and I found that really hard to cope with. I had to do some huge adjusting in my head to get around this different way of seeing my wife.
Oh, that's fascinating. And in particular, I can imagine in the middle of it, you've got these young children, 5, then 6 young children that you're caring for, because there's just very real practicalities there, aren't there? That I'm married with 2 young kids, and there's practical things we're navigating on a daily basis around who's sorting out the nappies and who's unloading the dishwasher, and if you go from a place where those gender roles are very clearly defined, and into a new landscape where it's figuring out that stuff for yourselves, then it can be challenging. And but there is obviously a huge beauty to that. I'm definitely not advocating for that that gender role kind of thing, but it can be challenging adjusting to that transition, right?
Yes, for sure.
Wow.
We're definitely.
And you came from Children of God was a Christian type of group that, if I heard you right, you're saying it also kind of had affirmed that patriarchal, you're the head of the household, the women do the housework and the childcare, that kind of thing. So that's some of the particularities that you were navigating in Ruth.
Yes, yeah. But that adjustment with coming out of the group was huge. It was a huge adjustment mentally and in every way. I was going more down the track of trying to find my faith back. I thought, well, if that wasn't truth, then what is truth? Because I was still in this black and white thought process that it's either right or wrong. And of course, I've come to learn that things are seldom right or wrong. There's usually some kind of a shade of grey in the middle. And you've got to find that balance with almost every major decision in life. Yeah. But our kids went along for the roller coaster ride, and that wasn't great for them either, with us trying to sort ourselves out and marital fights over, changing values and changing opinions.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been an incredibly rocky road. Have you got any, again, maybe advice isn't the greatest word, but any kind of tips for parents who are navigating that with their children? I can think of several people I'm in contact with who are in very similar positions. How do you as a parent try and care for your children in that roller coaster ride?
As they always say, that's a really good question when you don't know the answer. I think what my wife did that was really helpful was she got stuck into a lot of different childcare books, learning how to raise children, good psychology stuff. Whereas I was still kind of stuck in the cult ways of just, children are to be seen and not heard, and smack them if they're naughty and that sort of thing. And so I would suggest that do some good research, get a lot of different opinions on child raising and what a healthy relationship looks like. Possibly get some kind of marriage counselling, and recognise that there are different ways to do these things. Having an open mind to change and to do things differently is probably the most important thing. But of course, coming out of a cult, a lot of times people don't want to go to a secular counsellor either. So that adds another level of difficulty.
Yeah,
That lack of trust. Yeah.
Yes, that lack of trust is massive, eh? It's like, well, yeah, when everyone you thought you could trust has betrayed your trust, or you've found them to no longer be trustworthy, it's incredibly hard to know who to trust and what worldview to trust. And yet, yeah, I completely, I love that what you said around keeping an open mind and educating yourself and looking at other. Yeah, there's a real process to go through there, isn't there, of no longer letting the group define for you exactly how to believe, how to live, how to raise your children, and instead you have to go on that learning journey, which is daunting but also incredible. Of what am I going to believe? How am I going to live? How am I going to parent? Yeah, wow. And I'm curious about your family, your biological family, your parents and that sort of thing. Where were they in this journey? Did you have to kind of withdraw away from them while you were in the group and then try and reestablish those relationships after you left?
Yeah. It was more difficult for my wife than for me. She had a large family. And still had both parents. I really only had a father and one sister. So I was from a very small family, and we weren't all that close.
Yeah.
But yeah, her family, they were hurt a lot by her decision to join the Children of God at the age of 18. My father knew something was wrong, but at that time, there was not much known about cults either. We're talking, the 70s, 75, 76, I joined. So people didn't really know what a cult was or anything. It was just some wacky group of people. But I was put in a position where our leadership found that I was still too Bible-based and not enough cult writings-based. And they blamed my father's influence for that. So they asked me to renounce my father.
Wow.
And I had some admiration for my dad. He had his faults, but he was a very solid believer as far as a Christian went. And he had the character to back it up. He lived a fairly exemplary life in many ways. So I wrote him a letter saying, I have a new father now. It's his name. His name is God. And yeah, that cut him. That hurt him bad.
Wow. Yeah, that's wow. That's really interesting. And yeah, and so were you able to reestablish your relationship with him after you left?
To some extent, yes. But he was in Norway. I was in Australia. I had no money to go and see him. So after I left, I didn't see him physically. We spoke occasionally on the phone and wrote the occasional letters. But yeah, so we'd reestablished a relationship to some extent, and my wife and her family, we were able to reestablish a relationship with them. They traveled to Australia a number of times to see the grandkids and to be part of our lives, help us in any way they could.
Oh wow.
So that worked out well.
Yeah. As I'm listening to your story, I'm thinking about a word or a topic that's sort of quite painful or even shameful that people don't really like to talk about, which is the word regret. It's, often people say, oh, live, don't have any regrets sort of thing about your life and, all that sort of thing. But I guess I've encountered a few situations, both in my own life and in others, where, I think that's the word that sometimes is the only right word to describe some things as we look back on our lives and certain choices, that there is an ownership of, actually, I stuffed up there and I wish I hadn't made that choice or whatever. I'm just curious about, obviously we haven't, planned this discussion, but I'm curious about, would you term something like your decision to join Children of God or to raise children in there, that sort of thing, with anything like a word like regret, or do you prefer to use other terms? You were doing the best you knew at the time, and so regret doesn't suit? Or have you got any comments on that to people who might feel regret about their decisions around these groups, perhaps particularly as parents and things they might have done or exposed their children to?
I think it's a double-layered sort of answer. On the one level, with myself joining and being part of the group and then leaving and learning what I've learned, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way, because it's been such a valuable experience. Yet I don't recommend that experience to others. But there's been a lot of good that has come from it in my life.
Right.
But part two, on the other side, is a lot of regret and a lot of shame, because people that are in cults are a victim, and they also become a perpetrator. So your training is largely to become like your cult leader. So you agree to do things that you normally wouldn't agree to morally.
Yes.
And there's a lot of shame and regret around that. And I see it too with clients and others who have come out of groups like mine, where the parents don't want to apologize to the children, because to do that brings them shame, and to admit that they've treated their children badly, robbed them of opportunity, robbed them of education, haven't given them the childhood that they should have had. It's very shameful.
Yeah, right. So to even own up to that is, I guess, too painful for some people to even face.
Yeah, it hurts. And I hear it a lot from second generation about their parents. All we want to hear is, sorry, we don't want revenge. We don't want to hurt them, but we want to hear an acknowledgement of the pain that they have caused.
Yeah.
And it's a nuanced thing. It's difficult to get through to parents that that's what their kids want, because they immediately recoil and just go big, and for good reason in a way, because like for myself, in a cult, you are put down and pushed in a corner so many times, and not given any power of response. You're always wrong. It's typical in all cults that if anything goes wrong, you are the problem and you are always wrong. So you've had to apologize and grovel to leadership and to people in the group so many times that to leave the group and have to take the lower seat and apologize to your own children,
you can almost be allergic to it, because you've got this inbuilt defense mechanism, right, to protect yourself, right, so that it can be that makes a lot of sense. That's really insightful and really challenging. And it's so hard, isn't it, to I suppose, as a parent, and no doubt in future years I'll come across this, but to realize that your choices and everything that you've said and lived, it doesn't just impact you, that it's had profound impacts on those closest to you, and to stop and ask, what has that impact been? Or better still, to genuinely listen to those close to you and hear what they have to say. That would take tremendous courage to do that. So wow, hats off to any parents who do have the courage to do that. And I know that we'll talk more about KIF soon, but maybe that's something we can talk about more there, that I understand you do quite a bit of work with supporting parents of various kinds, including parents who have got children recruited, but they themselves aren't recruited. And there's all sorts of, it's very interesting how interaction with these groups has these huge ramifications for our biological family units. And yeah, there's lots of complex stuff to explore there. Well, we might, thank you so much, Tore, for sharing what you've shared today about your involvement, your own personal story, and some of its impact on your marriage and your children and your family. We'll wrap this part of the interview up shortly, and then in our next chat we'll talk more about your work as a therapist, kind of, I guess, the second major part of your life experiences as you've recovered, if that's the right word, established yourself outside of the family of God, and gone on to support others in their own post-cult experiences. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Very good. Hey, ladies. So how interesting was that interview with Tore?
It was fascinating.
I am so grateful to him for his time, and I'm also really glad that, he's just over the ditch for us here in New Zealand, and somebody who we can draw on for his experience, both personally as well as professionally, in this cult recovery space. So this first part was obviously about his own personal journey. What stood out to you guys in that interview? What questions were you left with? What stood out to you?
Well, so many things. I think for me, that concept of recruitment, the early doubts, the adjustment. Yeah, there was actually quite a lot.
Yeah, the recruitment thing is really fascinating to me. I might have said this on there, but for me, being born into a high demand group, I haven't really had to wrestle with the whole concept of recruiting, and it is just complicated, isn't it? Like, there's he himself spoke of vulnerabilities, although I have heard many people say that it's not just vulnerability that led them to being recruited, it's actually their beautiful idealism, because vulnerability can make you feel it can seem a bit like you're a bit of a bad person, or you had weaknesses or problems that led you to being recruited, whereas actually, as we know, there are some incredibly capable, successful, intelligent, highly educated people who are drawn in, and actually it's their wonderful idealism and their deep desire to make the world a better place that has drawn them in.
So he was 19, wasn't he?
Yes.
And traipsing around the world, and I remember him saying that there was not much to go home to. So
yes.
I've traveled a bit in my 20s, and I've also I've known plenty of 19-year-olds, and I think, oh, which one of them isn't vulnerable?
That's so true.
It's like they're all, and I know plenty now, and I'm looking at them, really like pretty self-assured young people from good families, and they are vulnerable because of their lack of life experience.
Yes,
because they have no reason to mistrust.
Yeah, and who wouldn't be attracted to a wonderful group where you feel like you're going around, aren't you, at that age and stage? You are looking for tribes, you're looking for belonging, you're looking for meaning, you're looking for adventures. Like, of course, you're going to be in many ways a perfect recruit, even without having wider vulnerabilities like
exactly.
They're selling something to you. So that the thing is that you may have some vulnerabilities, but this group is deliberately looking for your vulnerability. So you're alone, you're a wanderer, a traveller, and so they know you're looking for a tribe. So they're out in your sphere looking for you. So they're in Cathedral Square. They're looking for the single mum or the teenage girl they pick up as a hitchhiker. And they're inviting you to their thing. So the shared idealism is the good, positive view of the person who's searching for something better in their life. The vulnerabilities, that's the con artists' problem, that they are seeing a crack or a vulnerability, and then they make those vulnerabilities greater. Let's say your isolation, maybe you're traveling and your parents live overseas, they make it worse by saying join our group and we'll actually cut you off further from the family you do have. And so we have to grapple with this one a lot with people who've left Gloriavale, isolated commune, West Coast, and we are getting down to third and fourth generation, but they're still children. Mainly the first generation are still only in the early 70s, and it's their second generation that are leaving. The second generation are grappling with their parents' recruitment. into a group, whereas your sort of group, Lindy, you were born in, but so were your parents and your parents, and how many multi-generations in the exclusive brethren in your family line?
Yeah, several generations
Several.
back.
So that recruitment concept can be, for your particular, the exclusive brethren, it might not be something that plays at the forefront of your mind. I'm personally grappling with it all the time. Because
he did mention that.
Yeah.
He made reference to the things he regretted. Yeah, that maybe I was reading between the lines, thinking about some of the parental issues that you're referencing.
He definitely did. He said that there was a massive impact on the kids, and it was like a roller coaster for his kids. The changing values and opinions of our family after we left led to marital, arguments.
Oh yes, he did say that.
He said that. Yeah.
I've written down here his issue with, he did talk about regret and shame. And I think this is what he said. I hear it a lot from second generation about their parents. He's referencing the people he's worked with professionally. And they say, all we want to hear is sorry. We don't want revenge. We don't want to hurt them, but we want to hear an acknowledgement of the pain that they've caused. It's a nuanced thing and difficult to get through to parents that's what their kids want, because they immediately recoil. And I hear that in him too, like that whole that journey from a recruit to a parent, looking back and going, life could have been different for my children.
Isn't it fascinating? Because we've had the focus just initially right now in our conversation on him as an individual, and so often we do just focus on the individual with these stories, whereas to sort of bring the lens a bit wider and go, each individual carries biological family members or otherwise that are deeply impacted by their decisions, like deeply impacted. And so he started his story as this sort of almost quite lone, isolated, single young man, and then within a decade he's a man who's married, leaving with a wife, and leaving with, was it 6 children? Like that's a large family, and all of it completely enmeshed with this group that he had joined. And so all of a sudden, it's not just about you and your choices, is it? It's this huge wider impact, which must be incredibly challenging to work through. I can't imagine.
He spoke about shame. It wasn't just regret, it's that shame. And I think there's quite a lot of that shame gets carried. I had a really powerful thing happen just a week ago, and that's a first generationer expressed that they wished they had taken an opportunity to apologise to a group of leavers that they were in the midst of. And he said, I felt this urge in me to stand up and apologise. And I actually just, tears sprung to my eyes and said, oh, that would be so beautiful. I said, and it's never too late to do that. And I sort of put my hands out. The meeting had ended, but people were still around, having a cup of tea and different things. And I said, it's so powerful. And I said, there's especially a first generation, an apology that a second generation hears from someone. And he said, there were things that I did in there, and I'm not proud of it. And I just went on to talk about the power of an apology for repair and healing. And he said, I've experienced it within my own family. I've had to do that with my children. And I'm just like, what a humbling thing. It absolutely sets people free when you can do that. And
yet what a huge amount of courage it takes, right? When as he described, these are your choices that you've made, and you made them not trying to be dumb, not trying to harm people. You were chasing your idealism. You were chasing, in many cases, that's what people believe that God wanted them to do, and things like that. So it's quite difficult to then turn around and say I was wrong and I did wrong.
And a really lovely person who honestly and genuinely was searching for and believing
that they were doing
naively
the right
or
thing.
whatever, and isn't that's the beautiful, there's a shared idealism, almost a beautiful naivety, someone who just is so trusting that these are lovely people. And it doesn't take long. What do they say? 2 to 3 months and you're trapped. The love bombing's done its trick. You've been sold the dream, and then you live the nightmare. And as you become awakened to that, there's some shame and blame.
And meanwhile, by the time you have children, maybe you're completely entrapped.
Because he said there's always doubts, didn't he? Tore said, There were always niggling doubts, but you
Yeah.
just learned to push them down.
Yeah, I found that fascinating. And again, as a parent, maybe we'll have to get him back and dig into that parent stuff a bit more, because like I am contacted fairly frequently by people who are in situations and who are people in long-term relationships or marriages and have children. And many of them I think, what do the Jehovah's Witnesses call them? It's PEMO and something else, and it stands for physically in, mentally out.
Yeah.
Many of them, I think many more than people realize, probably are PEMO. They're physically in, mentally they're not agreeing with it, they want out. But that social entrapment of the biological family and fear of change for the spouse and the children, fear of disrupting their lives, stops them from taking action. And it would be so interesting, to and I mean, I encourage people to actually keep their families together if they can, just because, I mean, everyone's decision is extremely personal and not everyone can do that. But especially if you're talking under 18-year-olds, by the time the kids are over 18, they're more having to stand on their own feet and make their own commitment to the group anyway. But when you're under 18, if it means, if coming out loud with your questions and challenging the group means that their children lose their parent for life, boy, that is a freaking call to make. My personal mentality and opinion is often do what you can to keep your family together, even if it means staying PEMO for a few more years, just to try and, help you.
Except if there is abuse.
Oh, yeah, you're so right, Liz. I couldn't agree more. That is a really important point to make, that actually if things are going really badly and there's genuine, quite high levels of abuse of any kind going on, then even if it means, splitting the family and having everything implode, it's better to do that to ensure your own safety and the safety of your children and loved ones. Then of course there's you've just got to make the jump.
That would be another interesting conversation with him. What were you seeing that started to make you feel uncomfortable, that you needed to extract your children where you'd felt so trapped years earlier? And that's always just a really important thing to keep in mind. You do have victims, you do have perpetrators, you do have people who are both in these groups. And then you've got people who really thought that it was improving their life. They didn't necessarily, and groups that are spread across different countries. It's really hard to identify. All the groups being as liberal as the other groups.
And in this case, there was lots of pockets of communes all over the place, and they operated as set little groups, and so they could be quite different from others. And
so as we look back in history, we can go, all that stuff was clearly happening in every group at every moment of every time, and everybody clearly knew about it. And, I think of even just the Glorival situation, goodness, I knew an awful lot of information that the person living in the hostel there has never known about. And of course, I assume they're living there. They knew this was happening in their underbelly, and for whatever reason, they didn't.
Hidden even from different group members, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that's just an interesting thing to keep in mind when we're interviewing anyone who's come out of groups, or when we talk about any group. We're not trying to say everything and all people, had the same experience or participated in the same way.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, people do have very different experiences from even within the same group. Yeah.
And he was obviously an earlier adoptee, and what we notice even, say, in the Glorival sphere, that as people realised there were doctrines and behaviours that were occurring that didn't sit right, those people left. And actually then there was a long period where people didn't leave, and they were kind of like extremely trapped. But, he said really early on, he said, I've got nowhere to go. Like, he had these early doubts, and he already felt like he had nowhere to go within a short few months. My dad was here, there. I was like, I was stuck, and I find that incredible.
Yeah, and then what happens? The children of God is no contraception, lots and lots of children, and that's another way to entrap entrap individuals because of your children. And often because of the lack of contraception and the widespread promiscuity in this group, people could end up having children outside of their marital relationship. And so there was lots of kids all over the place popping up. I think it would lead to quite an incoherent sense of family. Yes. And they're moving around all over the place as well. So you leave a kid here, leave a kid there, send them off to a youth camp. A group that really destroyed families and a sense of cohesiveness and groundedness in a group.
Yeah, don't cults do that though? As a pattern. Like that's one of their mechanisms. They don't want family cohesiveness. Cohesive families might all stand up and, if they're an outspoken family, it doesn't work in a cult.
No. Yeah.
So
they're tearing apart families all the time.
Dismantling their external world, then you dismantle their internal world, and literally it doesn't take long. And I think Tore really hit on some of those key mechanisms. He talked about the good outweighing the discomfort. So you have all these doubts, but you brush them off. You're like, I better not go there. It's not that bad. And so you just start to, and then the positives of the love bombing and all the other things that you feel like you want or you need in your life. It's still filling a need. Yes, even though you have your doubts, it's still filling a need you have. And
that's really helpful because it goes away from the black and white views, even that we're tempted to think about culty groups with, is that they're not all bad or everyone would leave them and would see through it a lot more. There's often very real benefit and very real good mixed in with the harm. And that's a fact. So it was helpful.
And Children of God recruits were all missionaries as well, which is a little bit different from a lot of groups. Like they're very evangelical. And so everyone has this mission to bring people to God, bring people to the truth. That's very deep and hardwired. And that was I don't know about Tore, but the books I've read on the group, there's a lot of missionary activity and the children become part of that. And you're not allowed to work, that's it, in this group. Earning money from the world is really bad. So you have to earn money through going out into the street and proselytizing. So, or charitable people giving you money. So it just sort of ingrains going out and being a missionary into what people are doing, and that can give you a lot of a zeal as well for the group.
Definitely. And additionally, he mentioned that he wasn't really very good at selling stuff. And so the group used the skills that he did have as a mechanic. And I thought about how groups are still looking for people and want to attract people that they can make use of. Yes, so they might want the wife whose husband may have just passed away because actually they want the money, the inheritance. Like it's always what the group wants to further its goals, but you think you're joining to further your goals. And that's the great con of a cult. Goodness, what a really interesting chat. I'm really looking forward to part 2. So we'll wrap this one up and make sure you join us in the next episode where Lindy will continue to talk to Tore, and they'll be looking at an organisation that he helped set up in Australia to help in the cult recovery sphere and family support. So listen on in and we'll see you back next episode.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.